Good evening and welcome to this edition of the African Football Podcast with myself, Kwame, Ghanaian writer, broadcaster, entrepreneur, historian, and journalist. And in this week's edition of the African Football Podcast, we're looking about the ongoing World Cup, where Africa has 10 teams featuring at the ongoing World Cup in US, Mexico, and Canada. So before we get into the podcast, looking about the progress of African teams so far in the tournament. If you like just what you hear, please share to your friends, your family, social media networks. Subscribe to Ghana African Fix on YouTube. Hit the notification bell, meaning that every time we upload a new podcast, YouTube will notify you. We're also on Spotify. Look out for Ghana African Fix on Spotify. Hit the follow bell, meaning that every time we upload a new podcast on Spotify, you'll be notified of that. All right, so let's get into the podcast, looking about football podcast, looking about the World Cup and how African teams have fared going into the second week of the tournament. So, Africa's 10 representatives have now taken to the pitch. Some have played 2 games, for example, South Africa and Tunisia, and some have played 1 game, like Senegal and Ghana. Now, it's the largest African contingent in the tournament's history, and the early signs offer a mixture of disappointment, promise, resilience, and areas for improvement. So tonight, we're going to assess each team's performances so far, their prospects of making their last 32, and what the early displays tell us about the potential trajectory in this expanded World Cup. So we start with Morocco, who beat Scotland 1-0, the Verde, and drew Brazil in the opening game. So essentially, Morocco have basically qualified for the round of 32. And so Morocco entered this tournament as Africa's most complete team, and the opening performances have affected that status. As I mentioned, the 1-0 win against Scotland, even they're still good in the latter stages, they still managed to, particularly the first half, create a lot of opportunities whereby they could have put the game to bed, before the second half. But nonetheless, they beat Scotland 1-0 and had a very, very credible 0-0 draw with Brazil. And so Morocco were compact without being too passive. They were disciplined, perhaps a bit, without being conservative. They weren't even that conservative, particularly if you see the game against Brazil and Scotland in the first half. They actually went for it and played their brand of football, which can be quite exciting. Now, their defensive structure, making them hard to beat, is a hallmark of recent success, and that remains intact. So going forward then, Morocco's key strengths is that they're very well organized defensively, very hard to penetrate, as Brazil found out, have a midfield control spearheaded by Brahim Diaz, and also, they now have credible experience in many tournaments, obviously the Afrikan, and also the last World Cup when they made the semi-final. So they've already made the knockout stages. It looks like they're going to finish runners-up to Brazil in their group. So, they're in Group C with Brazil, both on 4 points. So Morocco's last game is going to be with Haiti, who are already out. So Morocco could actually win that game, and Brazil, will play Scotland in their last group game. So, Morocco have definitely qualified, but it remains to be seen if they can top the group. If they top the group, they probably will get a favourable draw in the last 32. All right, so that is Morocco. So we go on to Senegal. Senegal, were grouped with France, Norway, and Iraq. They lost to France. Even though they lost to France, they played a very, very good game, particularly in the first half. But obviously, France upped the tempo in the second half. And obviously, Mbappe starred for the French by scoring 2 sensational goals. And despite the defeat, Senegal, were tactically assured and also physically dominant as well. So even though they lost the game, like I said, to the French, they created chances through wide overloads and looked comfortable in both sets of possession and transition. Now, their key strengths are the midfield intensity, defensive reliability. You know, they've got Koulibaly there, who now plays for Al Hilal in Saudi Arabia. And also they've got good tournament experience over the last recent years. So despite, losing to France, I think they can beat Iraq, but the next game is a very important game against Norway, and Norway beat Iraq. So, with Erling Haaland and Martin Odegaard playing for Norway, it's going to be a tough game for Senegal, but I believe they've got the quality and the tournament experience to actually get a positive result against Norway. And should they do that, then they should qualify for the round of 32. Now we look at Ivory Coast. Ivory Coast, they won the first match against Ecuador with a basically 95th minute goal, and they lost to Germany 2-1 after taking the lead. And so, in both games they were physically imposing, technically secure, and tactically balanced. Yeah. So their midfield controlled the rhythm, and their defensive transitions were well managed. So in terms of the Ivory Coast, they've got physical dominance, they've got a midfield balance, and they've got pace along the wings with Ahmad and also Diamandi. So I believe that Ivory Coast last game. We look at the table here. Ivory Coast are in Group E with Germany, Ecuador, and Curacao. They lost against Germany, and they beat Ecuador. So the last game will be against Curacao in the week, and Curacao have surprised many by holding themselves to good account. They lost to Germany, got hammered by Germany 7-1. However, they did have a credible draw with Ecuador. Yeah, so when their keeper Roma had a very, very great game. And so Ivory Coast should not take this match for granted against Curacao, and a draw will be enough to see them progress to the round of 32. Now, Ghana. Now, obviously, critics back home have stated, and we all agree, that this is probably one of the weakest Ghanaian teams that has ever been to World Cup. It's certainly not the World Cup of 2014. That was last time Ghana, 2022. Ghana, for me, had a better team then than they have now. And, it's not the team of 2014 or even 2010 when Ghana made the quarterfinal. Now, despite this, Ghana was able to beat blatantly Haiti, again with a last-minute goal. So the defensive lineup, held its shape despite that. The midfield worked cohesively, and with Semenyo, their attack carried genuine threat. Now, Ghana strengths are basically their defensive shape, and also they improve in terms of their organization, and also they are a threat, up front in attack, particularly with Antoine Semenyo, who now plays for Man City after spending many years at Bournemouth. And so, Ghana's next game is against England on Tuesday. Now, Ghana have already got 3 points and should qualify as one of the best third teams to go through to round of 32. So even if Ghana lose the next 2 games against England and Croatia, I don't expect Ghana to beat England. England will be a very, very tough game. And England showed their pedigree by beating Croatia 4-2. Yes, an aging Croatia, but they still had to beat them. So I think Ghana will find it very difficult against England, but you never know what could happen, as Cape Verde and Curacao have proved, and we'll come to Cape Verde soon. So Ghana has a chance against England, but realistically, Ghana are not going to win that game, and also Croatia will also, with their experience as well, that could prove a very, very difficult game for Ghana. But despite that, they've got the 3 points by beating Panama And so Ghana should be, nicely placed to make the round of 32. Now we move on to Egypt, and Egypt were in a group that contains New Zealand, Belgium, and Iran. Belgium and Iran played a goalless draw tonight, and both teams on 2 points. Egypt are going to play New Zealand in the week. Now, if Egypt should beat New Zealand, that would mean they'll top the group. Yeah. So very, very important for Egypt to actually beat New Zealand so that they can top the group and be en route to qualify for the last 32. Now, Egypt have discipline and control, and they're always difficult to break down. They're very well organized and tactically mature. However, their attacking output remains limited. So basically, they've got Mohamed Salah, who's the linchpin of their attack, and obviously now Omar Mamouche, who plays for Man City. So they have more guard up front. However, they need more creativity and more goals if they're going to progress, into the 32. And the game against New Zealand, which would be, I believe, on Tuesday or Wednesday, will be a stern test, because New Zealand, we all thought they'd be whipping boys, but they had a very credible 2-2 draw against Iran. So it is not straightforward for Egypt. They're gonna have to play a good game if they're gonna beat New Zealand and qualify for the last 32. So for Egypt, their key strengths are defensive discipline and also game management. But the concerns are, creating chances. And if Mohamed Salah doesn't score, then, together with Omar Mamouche, it's difficult to see where Egypt's goals will come from. So, but like I said, if they're able to beat New Zealand, then the chances of reaching the last 32 will be very, very good. Now, one of the surprise packages has been DR Congo. Yeah. So DR Congo entered the tournament with modest expectations, but their opening performance against Portugal was energetic, organized, and tactically flexible. They pressed intelligently, counter-attacked with purpose, and could have nicked it at the very end. Yeah. And they denied Cristiano Ronaldo limited opportunities. And so with DR Congo, they've got key strengths of energy and pressing. They're very good at that. And they showed in the Portugal game their tactical flexibility. And so going forward, if DR Congo, their next game is against Colombia, if they're able to get a draw and then beat Uzbekistan, who seem to be the whipping boys of the group, then DR Congo have a very strong chance of making the last 32. Because I can see them probably drawing against Colombia, yeah, and definitely beating Uzbekistan. So that will put, when that's happened, that will put DR Congo in a very strong place of making the last 32. Algeria, haven't done well, and they're one of the weaker African teams to make the finals. So they lost their opening game to Austria. And to Argentina, rather. They got humbled by Argentina, Messi and co. Messi scored a hat-trick against them. So Algeria at the bottom of Group J. I think the next game is against Jordan, fellow so-called Arab team. So that's a team, that's a game that Algeria basically need to win if they're going to qualify out of that group, because I don't see them taking anything from Austria, because Austria are a well-disciplined, well-drilled European team who comfortably beat Jordan. And so with Tunisia, with Algeria, the key strengths of their technical quality, but they need more than that, like I say, if they're going to progress out of the group. Tunisia, well, unfortunately, Tunisia are out of the tournament already, having lost heavily. When they lost, they were hammered 5-1 by Japan, and that enabled, following that heavy defeat by Japan, Tunisia sacked their coach. Netherlands, where they lost 5-1. Tunisia sacked their coach and brought in Hervé Renard. Hervé Renard was not able to spoil the rot, because they lost yesterday to Japan 4-0. So effectively knocking Tunisia out of the tournament after 2 games. The last game is against Sweden, and Sweden have got 3 points. So a draw will be good for Sweden, but Sweden may want to go for the win because if the Netherlands, so Tunisia, Tunisia's last game is against Japan, no, Japan, Netherlands. So it's against the Netherlands, so because Japan beat them yesterday and Sweden beat them earlier one 5-1. So the last game is against the Netherlands. So that's going to be a very, very tricky game for Tunisia. The Netherlands seeking to top the group and be group winners. And so a very, very poor performance by Tunisia. And let's hope they can at least get a draw going forward against the Netherlands. But Tunisia are the first African team to be out of the tournament. South Africa look like following them suit because they lost their first game against one of the host nations, Mexico, and they drew also with Czech Republic. Yeah, they needed a late penalty to score a draw against Czech Republic. Their last game is against South Korea. South Korea, even if they get a draw, that would be enough for South Korea. So South Africa would need to beat Korea in order to qualify for the round of 32. And so, if South Africa don't get a win, then they're going to go home with Tunisia as well. Now, Cape Verde, for me, that's a standout result of the group of some of the group games. They're massive. Cape Verde produced arguably the most impressive African result of the opening round with a 0-0 draw against Spain, one of the tournament favorites. So, even though Spain had something like 80% possession, their defensive organization was outstanding, and the keeper delivered a masterclass performance. The discipline and shape were exemplary. And so, going forward, Cape Verde have a pretty good chance. Yeah, so before the tournament, I was saying that they could actually exit on the group stages. But if you look at, the games that they've got left, if they were able to, hold Spain, yeah, they've actually drew. So they've got 1 game left. So Cape Verde drew with Spain, and it's like they drew with Uruguay. So their last game is against Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, I've got 1 point. So if Cape Verde get a draw, right, then you could say that will qualify them for this tournament or the next 32. So Cape Verde have been the surprise package in terms of African teams so far. And if they're able to get a result against Saudi Arabia, then they will definitely make the round of 32. And so, so in terms of the first games, I was impressed with Morocco, particularly against Brazil, and they were very tactically complete against Scotland. Senegal, even though they lost to France, played a very, very good first half until France stepped up a few gears and beat them 3-1. Ivory Coast showed they can compete at a high level. Obviously, they beat Ecuador, and also they had a very good performance against Germany, losing 2-1. I think both German goals were scored in the last 10 minutes. Cape Verde, our standard defensive unit against Spain, and I think they could qualify if they beat Saudi Arabia. And also Ghana have shown that they can be disciplined and organized. Now, obviously, we've gone through with performances. Now, the teams likely to make the round of 32, Morocco are already there. Ivory Coast are more or less there. Ghana will be there, even if they lose the next 2 games because they've got 3 points. Cape Verde have a strong possibility alongside DR Congo, Egypt potentially, and also Ivory Coast. So obviously Tunisia are on the way home. They've lost both games. Algeria are going to join them as well, and South Africa, if they didn't get a positive result, they too will be going home. And so what we've seen in this expanded World Cup, we've seen that Africa has delivered a range of performances from the expected brilliance of Morocco and Senegal to the resilience of Cape Verde and also the renewed structure of Ghana. So most of the teams have played one game or two games, so there's still one round to go, and the picture will evolve quickly. So after most teams have played two games, we can be quite optimistic that at least 6 of the teams will make the last 32, which would be an achievement because, most of the times, African teams, they make out of the group stages. But obviously, this expanded World Cup will allow, African teams to make the knockout stage for the very first time. So we talk about potential countries like, Ivory Coast. No, Ivory Coast have made the group stage. They've gone out the group. I think in 2014 when Drogba was playing, they made the groups. But countries like, Cape Verde and DR Congo, who have not been in the World Cup for a long, long time, their potential to get out of the group, and that will be a massive achievement for those two teams, particularly Cape Verde and DR Congo. And so what we've seen so far from the African teams is that there's quality and there's organization and there's a genuine potential for multiple teams to progress. And so, the last run of games will end this week, and coming next week, we'll be in a much better position to tell you which African teams have made the knockout stages of the World Cup. So we'll continue to track their journey as the tournament unfolds, and we'll bring you latest in next week's football podcast show. All right, so this has been myself, Kwame. Thank you for listening to this African football podcast special, tracking the African teams at this year's World Cup. Subscribe to Ghana African Fix on YouTube. Subscribe to Ghana African Fix on Spotify. All right, so that's it for now. We'll see you next week for some more Africa football podcast.